Montana Territory, July 1876. They found her cabin 3 miles east of the burned Cottonwood Grove, hidden in the hills above the Musselshell River. Folks called her the witch who burned men's names. Said she could turn your past into smoke if you asked right and paid right. No one ever asked twice. Xavier McCall rode into the clearing with dust in his throat and a letter folded in his vest pocket, the edges rubbed near to soft. He had been riding since dawn, the sky bleeding from purple to gold over the ridgeline. He swung down from his gelding, boots crunching dry pine needles, and stared at the cabin. It was smaller than he expected. One room, stone chimney, smoke curling from it. The door creaked open before he knocked. "You're late," the woman said. She was younger than he thought she would be. Maybe 28 or so, bare-faced, dark hair braided down her back. Her eyes were sharp, the color of wet bark. She wore a plain brown dress, sleeves rolled to her elbows, streaks of ash on her hands. "I was not told I had an appointment," Xavier said, taking off his hat. "Are you Odessa?" "I am." He stepped closer. "I heard you burn names." "I do. I want you to burn mine." She tilted her head. "You do not look like a man who wants forgetting. You look like a man who has been forgotten too long." Xavier's jaw tightened. "I buried my wife last spring. I buried my name with her, but it keeps crawling back." Odessa studied him. "You are not the first man to come here with a dead woman behind him." He pulled the letter from his vest. "This was her forgiveness. I read it every morning and it still does not help." Odessa took the letter gently. "Come in." He stepped inside. The room was warm, with a fire in the hearth and bundles of dried herbs hanging above it. A low table in the center was blackened with burn marks. A chair sat on either side. Xavier lowered himself into one, his knees aching from the ride. Odessa knelt by the fire, feeding dry cedar into it. "You do not strike me as a man running from something wicked." He let out a breath. "I used to be a lawman in Texas. I was good at it, until I put the wrong man in the ground. His brother came for us. My wife died in her sleep beside me with a knife in her chest." He paused. "Her name was Clara." Odessa reached for a small tin box and opened it. Inside were slips of paper, blackened corners, curled edges. She handed him a clean strip. "Write your name, not the one folks gave you. The one that keeps you up at night." He took the pencil, his hand steady. After a moment he wrote something down and folded it once. Odessa took it from him. She did not read it. She set it on the coals. It curled, caught, and turned to ash. The silence stretched. "I did not feel anything," he muttered. "You will," she said softly. "It takes time for ghosts to notice they have no name left." He rubbed his hands together. "You ever do your own name?" She looked at him. "I did once, but it came back." He looked up. "Why?" "I had 2 children," she said, voice quiet. "Josephine and Jonah. Their father left me for a richer woman in Wyoming. Said he did not want a wife who smelled like smoke and talked to spirits. I burned his name, and I burned the names of every man who ever spat at me after. But I could not burn the name I held when I held them." Xavier leaned forward. "Where are they now?" "I do not know," Odessa said. "He took them." He sat back, staring into the fire. "That is worse than what happened to me." "No," she said. "It is just different." He stayed until the fire was low. She handed him a tin cup of water and he drank it slow. When he stood, she looked up at him. "Sometimes the past does not want to be burned. Sometimes it wants to be rewritten." Xavier let out a breath. "Can you do that?" Odessa stepped closer. "You came to forget. Maybe you should have come to begin." He nodded slowly. "Can I come back tomorrow?" "You can come back as many tomorrows as you want," she said, and she held his gaze. He walked out into the night, and for the first time in months, the letter stayed in his pocket. The next morning, Xavier returned with Saddle Creek and dust still clinging to his coat. He dismounted without hurry, and tied his gelding to the post beside the creek, where the water moved slow and quiet through the weeds. The cabin stood as it had the day before, but now the smoke from the chimney was thinner, more a ribbon than a plume. Odessa was outside this time, crouched near a patch of wild yarrow she was thinning with a bone-handled knife. She didn't look up when he approached. "I brought coffee," he said, lifting the tin pot from his saddlebag. "I never turn down a good offering," she replied, sliding the knife back into the fold of her skirt. "I didn't say it was good," he said, setting the pot down near her. "Just hot." "Hot's enough," she said, standing slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. "You ride from Roundup. I sleep near the river. There's a flat stretch just west of the bluff where the grass grows tall enough to hide a man. I like quiet." She nodded and led him back to the cabin. The door swung open with the same soft groan, and he followed her inside, ducking instinctively at the low lintel. The fire had burned down to coals, and she stirred them with a stick, adding a few fresh logs before setting the pot on a trivet near the heat. "You ever think of leaving this place?" he asked as she poured water from a clay jug into a kettle. "I did once," she said, "but the world out there wanted something from me I wasn't willing to give." "What was that?" "My silence," she said without hesitating. "They wanted me quiet. Soft in the mouth, slow in the head. I was neither." Xavier sat at the table, resting his forearms across the scarred wood. "And in here you get to be loud." "I get to be left alone," she said, setting the kettle on the firehook. "That's the loudest kind of peace." He watched her move, noting how deliberate her gestures were, not cautious, just certain, like she'd long since decided what mattered and what didn't. "I used to be a man who filled up every room," he said. Loud voice, heavy stride, always telling someone what was what. Clara used to say I never let the quiet speak for itself. Odessa glanced at him. "Did you learn to listen after she died?" "I thought I did. But it turns out I was listening to the wrong parts. The cursing, the guilt, the what-ifs. I never listened to what she left behind." "What did she leave?" He reached into his coat pocket and laid a small, worn brooch on the table, a simple brass oval with a pressed forget-me-not beneath glass. She wore it every Sunday, said it reminded her of spring in Missouri. I never noticed how often she touched it till it was the only thing left not covered in blood. Odessa studied the brooch, not touching it. "You carry it, but you don't wear it." "I don't feel like I've earned it," he said. She looked at him then, her gaze steady. "Grief isn't a debt. It's a wound. You don't pay it off, you let it scar." He nodded slowly. "You always talk like that." "Like what?" "Like you've already lived 2 lives and are halfway through a third." She poured the steeped water into 2 clay cups, careful not to spill. "Maybe I have." He took the cup, warming his hands on it. "You burned my name yesterday, but I think the fire just cleared enough brush to see the trail. You looking to follow it?" "I reckon I am." She took her seat across from him. "Then you'll need more than ashes. You'll need something new to carry. I don't know what that is yet. You don't have to. Not today." Outside, the breeze shifted, rustling through the pine. The hush between them stretched long but didn't feel empty. He traced a finger over the brooch and then slid it toward her. "You keep it for now," he said. "Not as a burden, as a promise." She didn't touch it, just looked at him. "What promise?" "That I'm coming back again. Not to forget this time, but to remember different." Odessa nodded once. "Then you'll need a place to sit." He glanced around the cabin. "Seems I already got one." And for the first time in over a year, he let himself feel what it meant to stay still. The third morning, Xavier arrived before the sun had fully lifted its weight off the hills. Pale blue light spilled through the trees, and dew clung to the grass in silver threads. He didn't knock this time. He waited near the porch rail, arms folded, watching the chimney stone catch dawn's first warmth. Odessa stepped out with a willow basket tucked against her hip. Her sleeves were down today, hands clean, hair braided tighter than before. She paused when she saw him, then nodded once and started down the path toward the trees. He followed without speaking. They walked a mile or more, the trail narrowing until it dipped into a hollow thick with elderberry and pine. A creek ran shallow through the gully, and she knelt beside it, setting the basket on a flat rock. "I gather from here after the first heavy rain," she said, brushing her fingers through the wet moss. "But it's late this year. The earth's holding back. You ever think that's because it's tired?" Xavier crouched near her, letting the cool water run over his fingers, like it's waiting for someone to ask it different. She chuckled, low and brief. "You speak like a man who's only recently learned not everything can be forced." "I suppose I'm still learning," he said. "I spent a long time mistaking control for strength." "You're not the only one," she said, shifting a small stone aside. Beneath it, roots curled in dark soil. She cut a few with a small blade and laid them in her basket. "My mother used to say the fiercest things grow quiet. It took me years to understand she meant herself. What happened to her? She died giving birth to my brother. He didn't live either." Odessa stood, brushing dirt from her knees. "My father left 2 winters after that. Couldn't bear the house anymore. I was 12. Xavier looked at her. "You raised yourself." "I had to. The land taught me the rest." They walked back slowly, the basket swinging between her fingers. Birds had begun to stir in the canopy above, their wings brushing the morning hush with soft whistles. When they reached the clearing, she veered toward a small patch of ground behind the cabin wild with plantain, tansy, and something purple he didn't recognize. "I've got more salves to make before the frost sets in," she said, kneeling beside a row of low-lying leaves. "You're welcome to stay if you've got nowhere else calling." "I've got nowhere calling," he said. "Not anymore." She didn't answer right away. Then, "There's a stump near the back fence. Sun hits it around midday. You'll be warm there." Xavier found the stump and sat. The heat came slow but steady, and he closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of crushed sage and dry pine. A woodpecker knocked somewhere in the trees. He stayed like that until Odessa came round the corner with a shallow bowl and a bit of bread. "You eat slow or fast?" she asked, offering it. "Depends on whether I'm alone." "Well," she said, settling beside him on another stump, "you ain't." They ate in easy silence. When the bowl was scraped clean, he passed it back and their fingers brushed. "I never knew a woman who lived like this," he said. "Not because she had to, but because she chose it." "I didn't choose it at first," she said. "I ran to it. But now I don't think I could live any other way." "Would you ever let someone live it with you?" She turned her head, eyes steady. "Are you asking?" "I'm asking if you'd even consider it." Odessa stood and looked out toward the trees. "I've had folks come and go. Men with stories, men with grief. Most of them wanted saving. None of them stayed long enough to learn my name without the smoke." "I don't want saving," Xavier said, rising. "And I already learned your name, Odessa." She met his gaze again. "Then you'd best start learning what grows here. Because come winter, we'll need more than heat to keep from breaking." He gave a slow nod. "Then teach me. I'll carry whatever needs carrying." Her eyes softened just slightly. "Tomorrow we dig for burdock. You ever use a spade?" "Not for anything gentle," he said. She reached for the empty bowl. "Then it's time you did." They walked back to the cabin together, side by side, sun at their backs and no ghosts ahead. By the 5th day, Xavier could tell burdock from dockleaf without being told twice. His hands were blistered raw from the shovel, but he didn't complain. Odessa never mentioned the ache in her own joints, though he saw how she flexed her fingers after long hours bent over the soil. They never spoke of pain unless it was necessary to the work. That morning, the sky sat low and heavy, the kind of gray that promised rain but didn't hurry to deliver. Odessa handed him a bundle of dried willow bark wrapped in linen and pointed toward the slope behind the ridge. "Folk in the basin east of here," she said. "Old woman named Elsa twisted her ankle hauling water. I said I'd send something for swelling." Xavier took the bundle and tied it with a strip of leather to his saddle horn. "Anyone else there I should look out for? She's got a grandson. Doesn't say much. Lost his voice after a fever last spring. Don't try to fix him." He nodded once and mounted up. "You want anything from town if I swing that way?" She hesitated. "If you find good thread, take some. Green if they have it." He left before she could say more. The basin was quiet when he arrived, the few cabins scattered across the flat in weathered slouch. He found the old woman seated on a stool near a broken fence, her foot propped on a crate, wrapped in old sacking. She didn't ask who he was, just reached for the bundle and nodded when he handed it over. "Odessa still out there, then?" she asked, unwrapping the bark and sniffing it. "She is." "Good. World's thin on women who know what they're doing." Xavier didn't argue. He stayed long enough to patch the fence without being asked, then turned back toward the trail. On the way, he bought the thread from a trader passing through with a cart of odds and ends. It wasn't green. It was a dusky blue-gray, like the sky before thunder. Still, it seemed close enough. By the time he reached the cabin, the rain had begun. Odessa stood under the porch overhang, arms crossed, her braid darker from the damp. "Didn't have green," he said, holding out the spool. She took it, turning it in her hands. "This is better." He leaned against the post. "You always sew your own clothes." "Started when I was 16. Couldn't afford mistakes after that." "You ever sew for anyone else?" She looked up at him. "I did once. A woman who lost her husband in the war. She couldn't stop shaking, so I stitched her a shawl." Said it felt like something holding her together. Xavier didn't speak for a long moment. Then, "You ever think about making something just because you want to?" "I'm not sure I remember how." Rain tapped soft against the cabin roof. Xavier stepped closer, his boots landing solid on the planks. "You said you ran here. From something. I ran too, but it doesn't feel like running anymore." "What does it feel like?" she asked. "Like I stopped just before I lost the last of myself." Odessa's eyes didn't shift from his. "And now I think I found something worth staying for." She didn't answer right away. Then she reached for his hand, not sudden, just sure. Her fingers slid into his, steady and warm despite the chill. "I've never stitched anything for a man," she said. "You don't owe me anything." "I know, but I've got some fabric I've been saving. It's rough spun, not pretty, but it holds." "I don't want pretty," he said, his voice low. "I want something that lasts." She gave a small nod once. That night they ate by lamplight. She stitched while he read aloud from a book of fables she kept tucked behind the hearth. They didn't speak of the past. They didn't need to. The silence had changed shape. It no longer pressed down. It held. By late September, the cabin had begun to smell of dried apples and lye soap. Odessa kept the windows cracked during the day to let the air move through, and Xavier had built a lean-to along the north side to stack the firewood they'd need once the snow came. They worked in rhythm now, no orders, no tallying. Just a quiet understanding of what needed doing and who was best suited to do it. On the morning the trapline snagged a red fox, Odessa stood over the animal without touching it. Its leg was caught clean through, bone not yet broken but close. Xavier crouched beside her, waiting for her to decide. "Could still live," she said, voice low, "but not without pain." He offered her the knife handle first. She didn't take it. "You do it." He nodded and ended it quick. When they buried it beneath the spruce near the creek, she didn't flinch, but she stayed a long time after the earth was packed down. That night, she took out the rough spun she'd spoken of weeks ago. Not the shirt she'd meant to make him. He already wore that most days, but a second piece of cloth, thinner, dyed with walnut hulls. She laid it across her lap and began to stitch without pattern. Xavier watched from the hearth. "What are you making?" "A cover for the cradle." He blinked slowly. "You expecting visitors?" "No," she said, "but I'm not afraid to plan for a life I want." He stood and crossed the room. "You sure?" "I wouldn't say it if I wasn't." He knelt beside her chair, resting a hand on her knee. "Do you want that with me?" She looked at him fully. "I trust your hands. I trust your voice in the dark. I trust you not to run when something breaks. That's more than I ever thought I'd have." His fingers tightened gently. "I want to ask you something." "Then ask it." "I want to build another room onto the cabin. Not for me, for us. I want the space to carry your life beside mine." She didn't answer right away. Then she reached for his face, her palm settling against his cheek like it belonged there. "Then we'll build it together." By the first frost, they'd laid the foundation. Xavier carved the beams by hand, and Odessa mixed the mortar with care. She painted the doorframe a deep brown from boiled alder bark, and he hung a small horseshoe above it for luck. They married under the pines with no preacher, no paper. Just her hand in his and the wind threading through the branches like a hymn. She wore a dress sewn from old flour sacks, and he wore his best boots, polished until the creases shone. Afterward, they sat by the creek and ate bread and dried pears, passing a tin cup of cider between them. That winter, the snow came down heavy and held fast. They kept warm with quilted blankets and the heat of shared breath. He read aloud to her at night, and she ran her fingers through his hair while he did. The cradle she'd stitched for remained empty, but not for long. By the following summer, Odessa's belly had grown round. He built a rocker for her from pine and lined it with wool. She laughed more often now, soft, unguarded sounds that filled the cabin like birdsong. When the baby came, it was a girl. They named her Clara Ruth, not out of grief, but gratitude for what had been and what had come after. Xavier held her against his chest with quiet awe, whispering promises only she could hear. He buried the brooch beneath the roots of a young aspen not far from the cabin. Odessa stood beside him, their daughter asleep in her arms. They said nothing. There was nothing left that needed saying. Years passed. The lean-to was replaced with a shed, and the herb garden grew wild in the best way. Clara learned to walk between the rows, her small fingers brushing chamomile and sage. Odessa taught her which leaves to gather, and Xavier taught her how to split kindling without wasting strength. They never left the land. They had no need. The world had found its place in them and they in it. And each night, when the fire burned low, he would wrap his arm around Odessa's waist, and she would rest her head against his shoulder. In the hush that followed, they'd listen to the wind through the trees and the soft breath of their daughter dreaming nearby. They had no ghosts left to bury. Only a life, quiet and whole, stitched together by hands that never let go.